Let's take a look then at each of the controls on Gravviti's designer page. We'll talk about the theory and the possibilities of the controls here, and then in later videos, the ones that start with the red giant, we'll put that theory into practice and actually build out some nice designs. But those videos, and even these videos that tell you about the controls, will probably tell you things that you might have had more fun figuring out for yourself in the app. So if you want, you could just pause this and go off and spend a bit of time exploring and playing around with the controls in Gravviti and see what you can discover. You can always come back here after that. The controls on this page are arranged in 3 columns. In the first column, the controls apply to all the planets. In the second column, they apply to the selected planet. And in the third column, the controls apply to the selected layer in the selected planet. So we'll take a look at what you can do with a single layer first. And a layer is actually the gradient between a colour at the centre and a colour at the edge. And what you set those colours and other settings to gives you a surprising amount of control over how that gradient looks. Figuring out what you can do with that control and how to blend layers together is where a lot of the fun of Gravviti is. By default, a layer is fully opaque red in the centre and fully transparent red at the edge. You might be wondering what I mean by fully transparent red. Fully transparent means invisible, so doesn't invisible red look exactly the same as invisible yellow or invisible any other colour? Well, it does on its own, but in a gradient it does make a difference. If we take a closer look, you'll see what I mean. So here's the centre colour. Its hue is set to a red, and we'll come back to these two later. But its opacity is at full, so this is fully opaque red. So remember what that looks like as we flip to the edge colour. This is the same apart from opacity. So it's red, but it's 0 opacity. So this is fully transparent red. So the opacity at the centre and the opacity at the edge are different, so there is an opacity gradient. And in that case, the hue of a fully transparent colour makes a difference. As you'll see, we're going to drag this up change the hue so that it goes from fully transparent red to fully transparent yellow. And so you'll see that the colours in the gradient are now different than they were before. Not only are the colours fading away as the gradient reaches the edge, but also it's turning yellow. So now let's come back and talk about saturation. The saturation is essentially how much of an effect the hue has on the colour. So when it's fully saturated like this, what the value does is simply change it from a light red, as it is now, fully light red, down to a dark red, and it gets so dark that it just fades away to black. And as we remove saturation, as we lower the saturation, we're actually removing the colourfulness or chromaticity of the resulting colour. And we can drag it all the way down and desaturate the colour. You may have heard the term desaturation to mean faded or colourless. And when we pull saturation all the way down to 0, then the effect that value has is to alter the shade of grey, the kind of grayscale, because setting down to saturation at 0 essentially puts you into a kind of grayscale, like a black and white movie kind of world, where value goes from white down through shades of grey all the way down to black. So you remember, when value is at 0, it's black, and so it doesn't matter what saturation is. Now remember that the edge colour is fully saturated. We'll leave that fully saturated, and then we'll come here and we'll actually drop this saturation all the way down so that there's no redness anymore. We've taken all the redness out. But again, just like there was a difference between fully transparent red and fully transparent yellow where there was an opacity gradient, similarly there is a difference between fully saturated red, which looks white, and fully saturated yellow, which also looks white, in a gradient, if there's a saturation gradient, and of course there is here. So again, just like we did when opacity was down at 0 at the edge, I'm going to drag this up and you'll see that it does make a difference. That changing the hue does make a difference when there's a saturation gradient. And then let's, on this dialog, let me show you that the edge is fully transparent. So the only thing that is controlling the transparency or the opacity of this entire layer really is this one control, because it's fully transparent at the edge. So this is a way of just essentially controlling the transparency of the layer, and you can do this with any layer. Just fade it away or bring it back. I can change the size of the layer. I can move it left and right, or up and down. If I increase the opacity of the colour at the edge, you'll see what size really means. It's really setting where the edge colour is. So it only looks like there's an edge there if the edge colour is fully transparent like that. Otherwise the colour spills out beyond the selection adorner and across the rest of the texture. From the selection adorner though, you can see where the edge colour is and where the centre is. So I'll set the edge colour to fully transparent yellow, and we'll talk about the colour curve control. So with this curve, with this slider set to its default setting, the two colours, red and yellow in this case, are about equally represented in the gradient. If I increase the curve setting, the gradient becomes biased towards the centre colour, and if I decrease it, the gradient becomes biased towards the edge colour. And this setting only operates on the colour components of the gradient, so it only operates on the hue, saturation and value components of the gradient, and if the centre and the edge colours have the same HS and V values, then there is no colour gradient, and so this setting has no effect. The opacity works the same. Opacity curve works the same way. Let's just to highlight what it's doing. Let's actually switch the opacities. Put it fully opaque at the edge, fully transparent in the centre, so that we can see what's going on. So as I increase this setting, we get biased towards, the gradient becomes biased towards the centre opacity, which is fully transparent now. And as we decrease it, the gradient becomes biased towards the edge opacity, which we set to fully opaque. But that's it's unusual to have it set that way. You've usually got fully transparent at the edge, fully opaque in the centre. And so what you usually use this setting for is to go from anything from a really focused, kind of shiny specular highlight, that's the kind of thing you could use this layer for, through to it being kind of a soft edged star, through to it being a hard edged planet. So this button up here, if you decided that you actually wanted yellow in the middle and red at the edge, then you can tap that button and it swaps the colours. It only swaps the colour components, not the opacity, because you probably still want it to be transparent at the edge. So in the next video then we'll take a look at the rest of the controls on this page.